late start, but we're here. We're ready to have a lovely conversation with Mark Andersen and Joshua Coombes. My name is Matt Cole. I'm a receiver at Politics and Prose, and thank you for joining us here to celebrate the release of Do Something for Nothing. At any time during the event, you can click on the link in the chat to purchase copies of today's book on P&P's website. Your purchases will come to the store at a difficult time for small businesses across the country, as we know. And in addition to growing your own library, a book sale from Politics and Prose means that we at the store are able to keep bringing you content like this, which we're so proud of. You can ask the author a question by submitting it to the Q&A box, the button for which can be found near the bottom of your screen. Please be sure to submit it in the Q&A and not in the chat to make sure that the author sees it. But I'll waste no time getting to the main event. Joshua Coombes is a British hairstylist and founder of Do Something for Nothing, a movement encouraging people to connect their skills and time to those in need. And Mark Andersen is the co-author of Dance of Days, 2 Decades of Punk in the Nation's Capital, and author of All the Power. And without further ado, welcome. Mark, it's all yours.
Yeah, hey, thanks so much, Matt, and thanks Politics and Prose, and most of all, thank you, Joshua, for being here with us. I just want to jump in, and I'm going to jump in with what I thought was maybe one of the most single striking vignettes in your book, where you were in Mumbai in India and cutting an individual's hair, and a crowd gathered, and amongst the crowd was an individual who took exception to what you were doing and started shouting something that you didn't understand, but then your friend translated it, and it roughly translated into, why are you wasting time with this person? This is his own fault. He is here. Could you kind of tell us a little bit more about what happened there, how you felt, and kind of how that ties to the broader message that your book is trying to impart?
Yeah, of course. And thank you. I just want to say, for the record, Mark, it's really great to be here and chat to you. We've only just met. Everyone, thanks for attending here and being a part of this. And the late start was me rushing back to London after some things. So I'm really happy to be here and delve in and talk about Do Something for Nothing, and excited for that to be released this week in America. So to answer your question, Mark, that moment you're talking about happened to me, and has happened to me quite a few times, which is, for clarity to anyone listening, it's when I'm out cutting hair on the street and I'm physically doing this for people who are experiencing homelessness, and I'm kind of out set up with my things. Obviously you've got passers-by, and this moment you're talking about in Mumbai in India, I think it's something I've experienced many times, which is people sort of asking why you're spending your time bothering to help somebody who might not want to help themselves. They could be referring to somebody who's suffering from some kind of addiction, mental health issues that may seem kind of quite different than their own lives, than are like a lot of people's lives from the outside. Or it could simply be that someone has a bad attitude. Again, from the exterior and what we can see from someone's attitude. And I feel that the way I answer that question, and I always do, is that like the ugliest times in my own life, like the times where I've made mistakes and that I've sort of needed a helping hand, times when, for whatever reason, I've been down on my luck and I've needed people around me, they're not all that pretty. And the thing with life on the street for a lot of people is their life's played out completely in the open, for everyone to see a lot of the time. And maybe people can relate to this. Like if you were to think about those moments that, your behavior because of your mental state, because of things that have happened in your life, how that's altered your behavior. If you could think about those times and imagine them happen in public, in the middle of a supermarket, or, on a train, or in a car park as you're parking your car. Like for me, most of the time they've happened behind closed doors, like places where I've been able to like at least lock myself away from the world and rely on people around me. And in this moment you're describing, Mark, I feel like I try and look at that as for every person you see who may be having a hard time, there's also a story of redemption. We as humans love kind of stories of rags to riches and highs to lows, and the arc and the roller coaster that is a life that's you know, sometimes has like this texture and these nuances of people who do mess up and do make mistakes. But when someone's recovered from these moments, when someone's kind of against adversity, against the odds, like reached a place where it's well respected, and we can look at their life and say it's all straight and stand up now. I feel that, you know, in every person that I see and that I meet, I truly believe that there is that person. And I'm not on a crusade to redeem anyone. And, you know, for me, I just feel that I'm going to treat someone with the same respect as I would anyone else. Like in the first interaction, when I meet someone, I always think, you know what, I'm taking this as face value. I'm saying, hello, how are you today? And what's up, what's going on? And yeah, just basing it really quite present in the moment. And I think the problem sometimes that people might have is trying to piece together a story of someone's life without giving the time to actually listen to them.
Well, that seems like one of the key elements in what you're trying to do, besides, you know, the practical act of giving a haircut. You're trying to be present for somebody, to listen and to affirm their value as a human being, no matter what, you know, highs, or in the many of these folks' cases, the lows that they're experiencing. And what strikes me is that inherent in our reaction, you know, a reaction like that, which to, I think to some extent, probably any of us who have never been in that situation of living on the streets, you know, might feel at a given moment, is a sense of guilt or shame, because we see you doing something and we automatically think, well, maybe I could be doing something, but for whatever reason, we don't want to, or are scared to, or you know, whatever reason. And so instead of wrestling with that, we try to say, well, it doesn't make any difference anyway. Do you see anything in that that sort of off the cuff analysis that resonates in your experience with the folks on the street? Because it sounds like you've encountered this a number of times.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point you raised, Mark. I think it's something that, so for me, the way I see the work that I do, which is quite simple, you know, the reason why the subtitle to the book is Seen Through the Surface of Homelessness Through the Simple Act of a Haircut. And for me, it is quite a simple act, because a haircut grows out. It's not going to last you more than a couple months at best. I mean, essentially what I'm doing is I'm having a conversation with somebody and I'm listening. And I think we all do that in our lives in our own way, you know? So what I try and do is remove this word homeless and think about the human beings around us each day. And some of those people are in your life in personal relationships and familial relationships, and others are beyond that immediate circle. And I feel that the work that I do, and it's kind of what we all do on a daily basis with strangers. When you first meet someone at work, you know, pre-lockdown, and we were in the same room having these kind of interactions. But there's going to be strangers you meet, and I just afford someone the same grace as I would anybody I'd meet in a new scenario. And I think that we shouldn't feel any guilt around you know, not being able to help people more. If you walk by somebody on the street, I used to feel a tremendous amount of guilt. So I want to relate to that, to rewind back the years to sort of 5-6 years ago when this began, initially me going out and having these kind of interactions with people who are often struggling and going through hard times. And I think the problem for me, and I guess I can only answer that question from personal experiences, I used to have probably a little bit too much internal dialogue when I saw somebody who was experiencing homelessness. So I'd go through the, can I say hello? Can I say how are you? When clearly someone isn't in a good place. If I offer a smile, what's the end of that smile? Is that smile going to come off a little bit, not the wrong way? Is it going to look like I'm having a great day and I'm smiling at them? Isn't my life good and yours isn't? I mean, I used to play through all these conversations that for me just I realize now was so not stupid, because I think it's natural. We feel compassionate to someone, we want to help, and we think, well, I can't fix their whole world, so what's the point of a smile or a hello or how are you? But the truth is, that's a really amazing place to use the time you do have, and something that we all have, which is our interactions each day. And honestly, from hundreds of people I've met, I'll always narrow it down to people and say, I know, of course, we need more affordable housing. We need systemic change to get less people off food stamps, and to get more people kind of feeling valuable in their community and supported by their locality, and systems in place to therapeutically help people who are down. Like, there's all these systemic changes that need to happen, but when you're right at the sharp end of it, and you're kind of you're staring at each day, not knowing where your next meal is going to come from or where you're going to sleep that night. Those day-to-day interpersonal interactions, they're everything. Like, whether it's someone recognizing you as a human being, which is literally eye contact, a genuine smile, or a genuine just I'm here, you're here, we're here together on this earth. That means everything. I'm not going to sit here for 1 second and say that's the whole solution, but it's a start. And actually, that "hi, how are you" can lead to a conversation, knowing someone's name who you pass by on the way to work each day. That can then lead to trust that builds a back and forth kind of relationship over a few months, which then, when you hear a little bit more about their life, you might learn that you've got a friend who can actually help them a bit more than you, because they can help them fix this little element of their life that might lead on to have a a kind of knock-on effect to other things. So everything starts somewhere, and the truth is, like, "Do Something for Nothing," the title of the book, it's a bit of a, it is do something for nothing, as far as like trying to create this movement around the idea of like going out there and being of service in your community. But of course, I get something from it every time. We all do when we go out there. So I also say that, for me, I do the work I do also because I need those kind of interactions. I need to participate with people each day who are outside of that circle, as I mentioned.
Well, it seems like if we don't engage in this way, that part of us that's really important starts to die. Because if there is an ability for each one of us to turn off our recognition of this other person in whatever circumstance as human, to not recognize that, then we're sort of acquiescing in a world where some people are just thrown away as a matter of course. I think what's striking to me is that it sounds, going from that simple act that you do, you're also thinking in a slightly larger frame of trying to encourage people to reflect on their own lives and find a way to do, something analogous to what you're doing.
Yeah, and it can be anything. I suppose what I'm really interested in is trying to, the fatigue that I felt before I started going out and trying to get outside of my comfort zone with people whose life might look and seem a little bit different than my own. The fatigue that I felt sitting on the sofa, scrolling through Twitter, reading article after article about the things that seem so out of reach for me to be able to help, it just left me feeling, yeah, as I said, quite lethargic and quite kind of stuck to my seat. And I'm interested in becoming active in your own way. And I think that can really start from the smallest of things and the smallest of interactions. And I know that the vehicle for me is the haircut, like it always is and always has been since I started doing this. And the vehicle is to connect for me on a personal level, but then it's to tell stories, and it's to tell a better story for me, specifically surrounding some of the most vulnerable people in our society. But your version is going to be different than that, and I talk to plenty of people who feel kind of similar. Like it's strange how, when you, of course, we need certain help to help people, and there is a kind of need for aid when there's certain problems in the world and really fundamental kind of material help. But I think a lot of the problems in our own communities are kind of at least to begin with, I think we can sort a lot of them out between kind of sharing, as far as like not just sharing the things we have in equity, but the mental health side of this conversation is really huge. I think I just know, for me on a personal level, it's massive, and that we do overlook, I think, that side of it when we look at any issue of people struggling. It's like, okay, look, you're not gonna patch someone's life up completely together just by saying, okay, I'm here and I'm gonna talk to you and I'm gonna listen to you. But feeling unheard can really lead to people feeling isolated, and then when you're isolated, you can do some really I don't know, just destructive things to yourself and people around you. So my message with all of this stuff is this do something for nothing, and these words for me is something that we've done as humans since we've been walking this earth, which is having to share to survive and having to kind of put your arm around people closest to you in times of struggle and crisis. But we live in a time now where we're incredibly distracted. We live in big, cities where you can go a whole day and see 100 people and not talk to any of them. So this is like a reminder. It's a reminder I think works because you've got this transition in a person visually when I cut someone's hair, which is like a signpost to them read to their story. And then these words do something for nothing. Luckily, they've been picked up by a lot of people who felt similarly and thought, oh yeah, actually, okay, you can volunteer your time at a soup kitchen and that's amazing. And you can go out and donate, some money or some clothes or some food. But there might be some things in your own life that perhaps you overlooked, like things you enjoy, things that are skills, things that get you out of bed in the morning, and trying to connect those to people who need them can have some interesting effects.
I think one of the things that's so moving about your book, and I have found so many parts that are moving. I mean, just literally the photographs of before and after, I think speak powerfully, because it's like you see a new person, again, in a transitory way, but still a real way, a new person, a possibility emerging out of a difficult situation. And that's not to be underrated, it seems to me. One of the things that in my own life, and I won't dwell on this, but I grew up in rural Montana. It's a very different kind of world than Washington, D.C., where I've lived for the last close to 40 years. And you knew everybody there. You were in everybody's business. Everyone was in your business. It was a little claustrophobic. But I think one of the things that really shocked me to my core was how I came to this city, and all of a sudden there were people on the street who, were objectively in desperate situations. And that was shocking in itself. But what struck me is actually more shocking, more heartbreaking, was the reaction of the people around them, which was to essentially pretend that they did not exist. I literally remember people folks like they're going to work or whatever, and there's someone like passed out on the sidewalk, maybe dead, maybe alive, who knew? And people just literally stepping over them, no one stopping to have a look. And it strikes me that even though what you're doing is small and transitory, that it is also a direct assault on that wall that we build around ourselves that enables us to somehow think that it's okay that somebody is perhaps dying before our eyes on the street, and we don't feel a responsibility to help.
Yeah, I really like the way you put it, because it resonates a lot. So I suppose why I continue to go out there and what the motivation is to continue to go out and do these things. It's it shouldn't be, I think we all feel inside us I think we can all, when we peel back the layers, we all know it shouldn't be normal to live in cities of such affluence and see so many people struggling and see so many people in a difficult position. And I think we all feel that on a day-to-day basis. And that's why the only possible way to sort of walk past someone and not feel those things is to dehumanize them and to believe that actually they're less a person than you for such and such reason, or if you're not dehumanizing them, you're thinking, well, they must have made some really bad choices in their life to end up where they are. That could never happen to me. And then maybe they should just pull up this. They should have here. It's that whole kind of pull up your socks and get on with it mentality, as if like you're in control of every scenario that happens to you in your life. And I always think of, actually, there's someone in the book, David, who there's a quote that's really always stayed with me here. And he says, this is after he became homeless. He says, it's really surreal for me. There's no way I would have seen myself sitting here, no way at all. I've realized how we trick ourselves into believing that we're in total control of our lives, and we're really not. there's so much that can happen to a person that you haven't got no say or no control over. And I think the biggest realization I got after meeting more and more people who are experiencing homelessness is that you can do all you can in your life to try and better yourself. You can go to university, you can study hard, you can get the grades, you can, if you're lucky enough to have some kind of support network, you can you can do all those things. You can eat well, you can sleep well, you can exercise, you can tick every box that this society you live in lays out in front of you to have a successful life. But the kind of things that blindside you on some idle Tuesday, a phone call perhaps of a loved one, David in particular, that's what happened to him. His world turned upside down after one day. And I think we can all relate to the things that are outside of our control, like the trauma that we may experience, that once something like that happens in your life, it's very easy for us to spiral. And what I try and do is have a human conversation here within the book, which is actually, of course I'm interested in politics, and of course I'm interested in trying to create change and trying to affect change from the top down. But I truly believe that one of the biggest problems we have with this issue in particular, and what you're talking about and where you grew up, Mark, here, like I had that too. I grew up in a small town in Britain, and I was asking my mum when I was younger. I remember at an early age, I was like, well, when you moved there, you're saying, but it's like any small town or any city, I think you're going to see that in the UK or America. And I think you've got hundreds of people asking this question of like, is this normal? Is this okay? And the answer is it's not. But I think the mistake is that we're dehumanizing people on the news, in the mainstream media, and we're putting them in this category where this word homeless is like so stigmatized. And all we really need to do is you just need to listen to people's stories. It's so simple. Like the stories in here, I didn't pick them because they were beautiful and the best ones. In making this book, these were the people that came into my life. So this is a collection of people I met at random, like, and within each story and within the themes that run underneath, like the stories in the book, there's things we can all relate to. Take away the word homeless, or whether you've got a roof over your head or not. There's so much in here we can all, every person reading this, there'll be something that they'll relate to. And all I try and do is find those moments and try and recognize that, yeah, we're told a story right now about this that we can't help this more, we can't help this issue, that this is just the way it is. And it certainly feels like that here in London. All the work I've done in different cities in America, it certainly feels like there's this overwhelming sense of, yeah, but that's just the way it is. Or to drive by tent encampments with thousands of people, and kind of see people having to walk 10-15 blocks to go to the nearest toilet. Like, we know that in our heart of hearts isn't the way it really is. So let's just like dissolve this stigma surrounding this word. Let's listen to people, let's listen to stories, let's recognize that it's sometimes it's challenging and it's not all that easy and it's very complex. But I think the first thing is to, as you said, like to keep finding ways to disrupt this narrative that is the idea that we can't do better with this thing, because we know we can.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And even sometimes the language can be our foe or our ally. Like, or do we talk about the homeless, or do we talk about people who are experiencing homelessness? Because again, I don't want to, being too on your P's and Q's about language can be a dead end, a rabbit hole you go down and never come back up. But there is something important there, which is that this person that is in front of you is not defined ultimately by the fact that they don't have a home to stay in of their own right now.
Yes.
They are experiencing something, and that means it can actually change. It can be shifted to another experience. And I think what's powerful about your book is that clearly you've gone through a very profound transformation by having these conversations and giving what you can, and then also receiving the gift that they give, which is sharing some of their stories. And I do think your book is a terribly moving book. It helps us to have some tiny spark, at least, of that transformative experience as we read it and as we see these pictures. So I just wanted to say that and to thank you. I'm going to kind of take this on a left turn right now, which is that as it happens, I know that you have a history within punk rock music in the punk rock underground. And it's interesting to me because I see much of your approach as kind of fitting with that sort of grassroots, creative, compassionate ethic that I would identify with punk. How does what you're doing now connect, if it does, to your own history in that sub or counterculture, depending on how you define it?
Well, I know. I mean, I noticed your Joe Strummer hoodie straight away, Mark. I have to say, because I'm gonna put a lot down to what woke me up to, I suppose. Yeah. What I saw was look, I grew up. I'm going to try and start this sentence the right way. I grew up I put this in the introduction of the book, and I tried to keep it short and sweet because this is about the people within it. But without punk music, for me, it would be a very different trajectory of where I've ended up now. And the reason for that is because I finished school with nothing in the way of grades or nothing in the way of what we'd call GCSEs here, but anything that was high school grades, I had none of them. And it wasn't just the lack of the paper that was kind of to kind of represent success or not at that age. It was a deep feeling that had already been rooted in me by a lot of people around me, mainly adults, that this was it. Like 16 years old, I was at the end of, like, you didn't make it, man. Like, this is you didn't get any of those grades, and this is where this is probably things are gonna start getting really difficult for you. So it was more that feeling that when I got a guitar, and my auntie actually gave me her record collection, which was a bunch of old late 70s kind of punk rock music from the UK and also from the States. Kind of obviously what happened here in London was happening in New York and DC and other areas, and it was just like this. It was everything I needed in a record, listening to bands like The Clash, because it was suddenly this chance to express everything that I felt in school that I wasn't able to creatively express. Not only that, it was an education for me, truly, that I hadn't found a way to receive that kind of information before in the songs and the lyrics. So yeah, that was it was everything I needed at 16 to then go on and spend the next sort of 5 years or 6 years into my 20s really just completely focused on music. And not only that, but it was friends. It was like, even in this small town I grew up in, Exeter, in the southwest of England, there's this DNA to punk that you're going to find people who are into the same thing. And there was this little venue called the Cavern in Exeter that it put their arm around up and coming bands and put out our EP and put us on this little mini tour around the UK. And it just made you feel, looking back, it made you feel like dignified. It made you feel like you were part of something. And the coolest thing about it specifically, that happens, of course, in a bunch of has happened in counterculture movements of many different kinds and different musical genres. Like, there's usually a message or a spark that kind of like ignites a movement from what surrounded punk. For me, obviously, that was like also really great because it was quite easy to work your way into it, because you only had to learn a few chords on the guitar and you could write a song. And yeah, and the other ethos I think I've taken from that massively is that if you're weird, you're sort of in, and that was like, it's always been an accepting, empathetic approach to people who may look and seem different than you. But to be really honest, I used to, just to sort of round that off, I feel that I used to believe those things and kind of, I suppose, hold political views that mirrored like a lot of that ethos in punk music. And I feel like many of the people I met did as well. But what I hadn't yet done up until my mid-20s was get outside of my comfort zone in a way that I think I got quite comfortable in that. And I did forget about people outside of that circle. I used to think that it was punk the way it looked. And then obviously, of course, everyone goes through the similar experience where you realize, no, this is just about, well, to quote Joe Strummer, he said that punk rock means, I think he said, great manners to your fellow human beings. And it's like, that's a really beautiful way to look at it. That's how I look at punk now. It's like it went from Mohicans and rebellion and kind of feeling like part of something to just realizing it's just about turning up for the people around you and just about trying to take time when you can and be available for the people you may meet in your life. And that is something that stayed with me till this day,
Well, and it seems like one of the aims of your work is to kind of disrupt this narrative that exists that makes us feel as if we have nothing to give and there's no other world possible, nothing better than this. In that same way, it seemed like that punk did that very personally for you. And that strikes me as a powerful sort of precursor to the work that you're doing right now.
Yeah, it was. I hope I go and give talks in schools quite often. I talk about do something for nothing. I'll put up pictures and visuals that excite, I suppose, and kind of engage younger people of the work that I do, and then I'll tell stories and I'll talk about my own life and experiences and how this all began. And I hope, and I talk about this as well when I do. I say that it's really important to have those alternative options in your life, depending on who you are and how you receive information. Because I just hope that what was punk music for me that stayed with me now. I meet a lot of people, and a lot of people I see on the street too as well, who I can relate to a lot. They weren't provided the opportunity when things failed for them, and maybe they didn't have such a support network. There might not have been someone there. Like for me, it was a musical kind of, it was music and a guitar and everything that came along with that. But I think when you feel purpose, it happens in all kinds of different ways in your life, but it can totally change your trajectory. And I just see a lot of people who, that moment when they were at their lowest, there was nothing there there was not another option. There wasn't something or someone saying, hey, it's okay, come over this way, we've got you over here. And like, that's all it takes sometimes. And if that doesn't happen in like the formative years of your life, like it can take a lot longer to like for people to trust and for people to believe that there is. And a lot of the things I try and say in the book too as well is like empathy is something I've had to go through on a personal level as well. Like this one word, like empathy, is something that again, I've had to go through so many different depths to really try and realize it in kind of in the broadest sense of the word. And I'm still learning, which is like, even take certain words that mean something in your life, like love and affection and trust. For me to have empathy for another person, that I meet who's in a difficult scenario, I not only have to empathize with their life and what's happened to them to get up to that moment, but I also have to recognize that all of these words mean something completely different to them. Like love to some people has always had conditions and has always meant that there's a catch at the end of it, and maybe they've been kicked around afterwards. Trust maybe just non-existent in many relationships in their life. So you're not just being empathetic with someone's like whole life scenario and perhaps like the difficulties they might have been through compared to your life. You're also having to, their whole vocabulary and their whole the kind of world they live in and what words mean. Like it's a completely different reality. So yeah, there's stories in the book that hopefully kind of explain that too. But I just thought it's important to mention that yeah, there's a lot of a personal transformation that I've been through, and I think I'm grateful for that. I'm so grateful. I just know that yeah, that's it's never too late though. It's never too late. Like people who might not have been accepting of love, like there's been scenarios I've had when I've been cutting people's hair, and you do, I go back and I visit people 1, 2, 3 times, and it might be a really cagey interaction at first, but after a few times, once people get to know you, it kind of reminds me like when I was 15 or 16 too, and I wasn't trusting, and I wasn't anyone who was in any position of authority I didn't trust at all. And I recognize those same kind of interactions when I see some people, which is like it takes 3, 4, 5 times to recognize like that someone's actually means what they say and there's no catch.
No, that's really powerful, because one of the things that becomes clear is that you build relationships, at least some, with some of the folks. Now, obviously, you are in the book, you are in places all around the world. You can't possibly maintain relationships, especially with people who are kind of off of the grid in many regards, in all those places. But it does seem like, particularly with folks in London, your home base, that was something that happened, that some of these folks became your friends.
Yeah, exactly. I try, and it's an important part of this, is like it can be so transient sometimes. So obviously people who I see, I try and keep in touch with, and it's not always that easy, because it's with life in the environment of like the day to day, and the harshness of the weathers of the street, and the having to charge your phones and losing them, and the way that we keep in touch with one another, it seems so, it is beautifully convenient. There's so many people I keep in touch with in different countries who I do make friends with, but it's you're only ever someone losing their phone away from never seeing or hearing from each other, or being able to contact each other again. So yeah, in London especially, there's a few people who I over the years have become really close to, and I've built relationships with, and I try and kind of, when I can as well, bring them along with me to give talks about their personal lived experiences. So I can play more of a conduit to their stories. But yeah, in America, there are some people I've kept in touch with who are in the book, and it's nice. It's really nice to do that. Like I try and do that whenever I can. I try and like make sure I give my number out, and it's not just about, sometimes, to be really honest, it is just a haircut, and that's it. It's like a lot of life. Sometimes you meet people who you make this immediate connection with, and you're going to be friends for a long time. And sometimes it was, you work together for a bit, and that was that, and you don't talk to each other anymore. And I don't put any pressure on that. And I find that sometimes when those relationships do transpire into friendships and getting to know each other for years, that's great. And then there are some people who I've spent a lot of time with, and I wish I could talk to again, but every now and again I'll get a Facebook message from someone's friend or themselves, and someone who I've met a couple of years ago, and it's a reconnection, which is really nice as well. But I have to have an easy relationship with that stuff too, and just not put too much pressure on it. When I keep those relationships, it's really great, and other times it doesn't happen.
Now, when you went out and gave the haircuts to folks and struck up a conversation, you have done this in many different cultural contexts, are literally around the world. I mean, Australia, India, the States, obviously on the continent of Europe. Are there differences, similarities that you've seen, or is there one particular place that touched you more deeply, or left you with more questions?
There's, I suppose where things started for me here in London is always close to my heart, because this is where I walk out of my house, and I immediately first saw like something I wanted to try and interact more with, and I was curious about. And as we mentioned earlier, like I was on the way to work, and I was seeing more people living on the street, and I was giving someone a bit of spare pocket change, or doing what I could to buy some food. But I was walking away from these interactions feeling like, damn, I really want to try and find a way to sit down and get to know this better, and to try and do what I can to help. So these streets are always very, very kind of like, will always have a place in my heart. But honestly, it's amazing how I suppose the way I'd like to answer that question is, no matter where I go, until I started traveling in a different way. So I used to travel first of all with music around Europe, and then I'd travel and see friends and go on holiday with people. And whenever you could save up a bit of cash, I'd go away with some friends in Europe or whatever. But and my auntie actually lives in America, not too far away from DC, so I'd been over there before. But I started going away it was like a different kind of tourism, where, when I started specifically going my backpack with my scissors and my clippers and my gown to cut someone's hair on the street, I'd land in a city, and I'd go out and I'd walk around all day, like specifically looking for people to talk to, who often are ignored and often are invisible. And I can say that, what a way to get to know a place, what a way to kind of feel like you have landed, because there's something about going out and talking to people and giving people time and spending a few days rather than hitting all the landmarks of the city. I was like ignoring them. I was like walking past and there's someone at the at the doorway of this landmark someone's walking into, and I'm talking to them instead. And I say that not to say, oh wow, pat myself on the back, like what a good person I am. I'm saying it's just a very interesting experience of a city, and I'd recommend it to anyone because you get to know a place on like a ground street level that it's not in the tourist guide, you know, and it's not on TripAdvisor's 10 things to do in that place, but it's going to give you a hell of a lot more. You're going to get to know the way a place ticks. It's not always easy. Like you're going to meet people who are in a challenging environment, but any city or any culture I go to, whether it's been on the streets in Mumbai or places in South America or Australia or you know, North America or Europe, it's like this thing works, which is I go out my backpack, I sit down and talk to people. Okay, sometimes people don't want a haircut and I move along, and other times they do, and I spend a bit more time with people. But it's like I go out and I just, you know, I find a way of trying to like get to know a place through the people, and that's what's always excited me. I've realized, you know, I've always been a people person, and I think we've got so much more to learn from one another on a day-to-day basis, and the information that we receive day to day through these screens, and like I really feel like through the pandemic we're also in like an infodemic, and there's so much to take in all the time. We can't forget the people around us, whether it be that old lady next to you on a bus or the person standing behind you in the supermarket queue. It's like there's stories there's lived experience, there's people with messages for you, and they've lived their whole life. And yeah, it's important to remember to like look up from these devices and like talk to each other. Like it's one of the best things that we can do, and it's not only going to make you feel more connected to like the community you live in, if it is specifically where you live, it's also just such a beautiful way to learn about the world that I think before I hadn't put a high enough value in. You know, I'd read books and I'd and of course, you know, I want people to read this book, but I'm saying like you've got to get out there, and you've got to remember, like, yeah, there's these interactions each day that I know it's difficult right now in the pandemic, but when these things lift a bit, I really hope we can take this feeling of isolation and like taking for granted those what may have seemed small day-to-day interactions and placing a higher value on them.
Yeah. Well, just to quote another line from punk rock world, Chumbawamba had a song which is very important to me, a line in it goes, "Isolation is the biggest barrier to change." And I think that that's one of the most painful things of this past year. And maybe you can comment on this, but it strikes me that isolation, particularly for those who are kind of on the margins or off the grid, that the isolation and the risk must have been particularly extreme and painful for them. How has that affected the work that you've been doing?
Yes, it's the pandemic came and you know, as I was writing this book, really like putting together these stories after going around the world and quite a kind of relatively, as it was like the world before the pandemic. And when this came, I tried to keep in touch with people as best I could. And for some people here in London, that was temporary housing and this scheme where the government tried to sort of help people out and put people inside hotel rooms. But you know, I think it was such a flurry at the time of so much information, as I said earlier, that now it's coming to light what help really looked like for a lot of people. And it was actually isolation. You know, that word that was already for some people their reality of being on the street and being kind of an onlooker onto society and often being ignored. Sometimes these help scenarios of being put inside somewhere, I've been described some of the most isolating experiences that you know, you wouldn't wish upon anyone. And not only that, but the conditions were really awful too. So, you know, some people that I've met and I talk to now, and I'm trying to really feed back because I'm going back out on the street more often now. I'm asking what happened to you over the last year? Like what happened like over the last year and a half? While the rest of us were like, you know, a lot of us were locked down and you know, some people tell me about places they were put into where they left after 2 nights because their whole body was itching because there was bed bugs. You know, sometimes people tell me about shared bathrooms of 10 people. It's like you wouldn't wish those sanitary conditions on like any of your friends to stay there. So it's really important to keep an eye and like keep tabs on what it was that actually went on. I know in a lot of places in America, and speaking to friends there, that for some people living on the street, it was like there wasn't really, in some cities, there wasn't really any support for people. And I think, imagine what it was like to already have that lack of support and feel isolated, and then suddenly the whole world's locked down, and you're now you're where you were before, but it's just got so much worse because there wasn't anyone to even chuck you a quarter or buy you some lunch. So this thing has got a lot worse. And one thing I'd like to mention now is, rather than just looking at homelessness in this acute way of like how it's perceived when people do finally drop out of the system, like, we're all so much closer to this stuff now. We all know someone who lost a job through the pandemic. We all know someone who is like really struggling and didn't quite qualify for that grant that their friend did because one loophole in the kind of way that they registered to be self-employed or whatever. But my point is, we're all on the cusp, and I think we can all relate not only to this isolation, but also to relate to the vulnerability of these times. So like, it's definitely time to, as we mentioned earlier, to like penetrate this narrative and realize like homelessness is one thing when you're seeing it out in the street, but you're looking at thousands more people who are borderline temporary housing now, like probably in a way more vulnerable position than they were before. So it's time we speed up this kind of like, for me, it's about a more urgent, like more compassionate kind of urgency. I think we need to, as people in our communities, in our society, like all the divisiveness that was happening kind of before and during the pandemic, like we need to try and come together around this and realize that there's a hell of a lot of things that we can all relate to try and join together and like and get more urgency around this issue. Because whether you're homeless and you're on the street, like I know that more and more people after this time are going to experience similar things. So yeah, it's been difficult for people, and it's going to get more difficult, but I do remain hopeful in the sense that if we can use this energy, and we forget quite easily sometimes, like, I don't want this to become a blip in the past. I really do think we're in this time where, as much as we've all struggled, like we have to try and take some kind of silver lining from this. And I think perhaps what we related to here is the one we can, which is, we all know what it's like to feel isolated right now. And I really hope that we can use that to have better awareness and empathy for people who are experiencing this kind of isolation before and will do after.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that certainly I experienced reading your book was that I could identify. I mean, there are plenty of things I couldn't identify with, but there were places where I really identified with the stories of the folks that you were sharing, or if it wasn't in my life, someone that I knew. And I think that's tremendously important, because it is the antidote to the poison, if you will, the poison of that idea that you are poor because something you did wrong. Mm-hmm. It's your fault. And what we have to do is shift that to where it's like, actually, there's insane history. There are oppressive, unjust structures that interact, yes, with our personal choices. And there, but for fortune, could go you or I. And it strikes me that of all the really powerful and important things that I think a book like yours can do, that might be the most important, because it refuses to let each one of us off the hook. And hopefully this past year has changed us and made us a little more questioning of this narrative, because it would be hard for me to believe that anybody out there who's listening to this hasn't known someone or experienced this sense of increased vulnerability over this past year, and hasn't come away, on one hand, thankful that it didn't go south all the way, but also maybe with a little more, to use your word, empathy for those whom it has gone south, and maybe they've been south their whole lives, because just think about like the kids. I was struck by the kids that you took pictures of, I think in Mumbai, and just think that this is your reality as a child. And so I guess I know we're kind of running short on time. I don't know if there are questions out there that folks want to ask. We want to make some space for that. But I guess my last question, assuming that there might be other questions, would be simply, where do you hope this will go from here? Both your project, where you want to take it for yourself personally, but also where you hope it might draw others. Because now it's not just the physical act of what you're doing with these specific people, it's also a book and ideally a movement. So where would you like to see that movement go?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and I appreciate everyone tuning in. And I hope there is, I'm very happy to chat, and we can go over, and talk a bit more. And I just know that, look, it's very important to recognize none of us, like, guilt and feeling kind of like, I never try and point the finger towards anyone and say, look, you should be doing more. Like, guilt doesn't get us anywhere, and feeling kind of, also sympathy really doesn't as well. What we need to try and do, I think, is rather than feeling sorry for people, rather than feeling guilty because we can't do anything about it, as you said, it's that word empathy. It's just trying to realize the small moments each day, like to start and begin with just trying to actually think of what it's like for somebody else, and try and honestly lower your benchmark. That's what my benchmark is, really low, I'll be honest with you. Like, I keep on working out. To me, like, I have these, like, I've been doing this thing where I go out on the street and cut hair for people for, like, as I said, like 5 or 6 years now. And it could have well been quite easy for me at some point to go, is this really working? There's still people on the street. I'm meeting different people. I'm telling these stories. Other people are getting involved. Great. But, like, where's my tangible example of, like, what I've done to really make a dent in this thing? But for me, when I pose that question to myself, I'm like, nah, man, you've got it all wrong. That's not what it is. That is not what it is. It's like, I have one thing I am control of, like, each day, and that's, like, how I walk out into this world. And it's like, that's everyone's truth, I believe, is like, rather than concentrating on the negative things that we can't control, just concentrate on what you can and just walk out into this world with awareness of people around you, with awareness, as you said, of like these historic and systemic kind of like struggles, and not only that, but like all the days that have happened in someone else's life to get them to the point of where they are. So yeah, but my benchmark, as I said, is really low, which is like, I'll keep doing what I'm doing based on the fact that I know it feels right, and it feels like the best way that I can live to feel energized and be positively affecting the lives of those around me. And I already see that from Do Something for Nothing and this movement so far, that is other people doing similar things. I use this hashtag on Instagram whenever I post, and other people use it too to show their kind of version of this in their city where they live. And that's lots of different tangible examples I won't go over now, but they're all this vehicle for as we mentioned earlier, for connection, for trying to live beyond kind of like just you and your initial means. And I try and use art as well, which is like proceeds from the book. 100% of my proceeds go to future not-for-profit art projects that I put on. So that's a really tangible way that I see this moving forward, is not only with the book and these stories, thankfully, and huge thanks to Akashic and believing in this book to put it together in this tangible way to kind of live on in and be read. But I also, apart from the way I tell stories online, I put together these art exhibitions, because I really believe in creativity and trying to just put up these signposts. That's what I'm really interested in. This book's a way of hopefully getting people to stop and take in a lot of these people who they might not get to interact with on a day-to-day basis. But I will always try and find new ways of doing that to represent people who I believe have a voice, but are sometimes unheard. I'm not trying to give anyone a voice. Like, a lot of the people I have are the best people I met, like really the people I've met on the street in this journey, like, they're stand-up human beings, stand-up people with a hell of a lot of heart and a hell of a lot of love sometimes, but often they're completely ignored. So yeah, the movement moving forward, Do Something for Nothing, it can look like many other different things in the future, but I know it will be yeah, as you mentioned earlier, I want to go back to how you put it, which I think is finding ways to sort of, whether you said penetrate or disrupt, but to try and like remove this narrative of thinking this is normal, because I think that's my mission here, is like trying to wake people up to the fact that things can be better. But it takes imagination for change. To finish this point, I believe we live in a time where one of the tragedies is that there's so many problems in the world around us that are hard to know what to do with. But probably bigger than that, I'd say, is our lack of imagination of what change looks like now. Anything and any change that came about at any point in history, people weren't sitting around thinking, well, I don't know how I'm going to do this, and feeling fatigued. It was about imagining that there can be a better way of living. And I think once you get past that and your own inner dialogue, good things start to happen.
Well, and it points. I like the way that you kind of focus on the concept or the idea of imagination, like imagining other ways to be. And it seems to me that that's one of the most powerful gifts that art can give to us, whether it's musical art, visual art, or the written word. It can penetrate in a way that other things perhaps can't, and awaken something, a desire for something better, and maybe the belief that it's possible. So I thank you for that, and I thank you for taking this time for this conversation. I am seeing if there are any questions here. I'm not seeing any questions. So maybe what I'll let you close it out with that, whatever you would like to close out with. Maybe one thing, maybe talk about your connection to Akashic Books, how you got connected and how you found them to work with. Of course, knowing that Akashic in itself is kind of an outgrowth of that radical arts community, the punk rock world, since that's where Johnny Temple kind of put the whole thing together, from the money he got from when Girls Against Boys signed to a major, and he invested that into this, which has taken on a life of its own, far beyond punk rock world.
Yeah, and what an incredible thing. And again, thanks again, Mark, and thanks for your support for this message and for this book and the work that you've done, the words that you've put out there in this world. And to Akashic, well, me and Johnny met for coffee when I was on a trip in New York, and their belief in the book proposal when it was sent out, and their belief from the start really has just been incredible. And I think it was that meeting of minds for me from the beginning, on a level, through music and through like this ethos that we talked about through this discussion. It was just like, wow, it couldn't have been a better fit for me, really. And it's just been such from the design and putting this together, like everyone on their team, it's just been a really fantastic process. So looking to be really honest as well, of course, when I first were interacting with them, I looked at what else they put out there in this world, and like it's an amazing source of learning and information and stories and all the things we spoke about today. I think it exists a lot in many different authors and people they've supported in the past to champion their message. So very happy to be another one of those. And really looking forward to this book coming out this week and being in people's hearts and minds, hopefully, and shared beyond this conversation. So yeah, thank you again, everybody, for tuning in. I appreciate you, and thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, well, thank you, Joshua, and thanks to Akashic, a great independent publisher, and of course, the mighty Politics and Prose.
Of course, there's that too. I just wanted to also, of course, say Politics and Prose, thank you so much for hosting this and bearing with me as well. This has been really great. Also, another thing too as well, I haven't got the lighting quite right, have I? Because the sun's gone down as I've been talking and I haven't been able to reach for a light switch. So you guys have just watched me getting darker and darker. Not the most professional Zoom from me. Apologies.
That's all right. Well, I'm just going to hop in and say, again, thank you, Mark and Joshua, coming in and taking us on this journey together. I want to remind everybody that your patronage is what enables us to continue bringing programming like this. And we cannot continue to host these events without you guys buying books to support these events. So please support Joshua and P&P by buying do something for nothing using the button below. I look forward to setting your order aside when it comes into the receiving room. And as other folks may have heard over the years, even if you're not from a traditional helping profession, that doesn't mean that you can't be a helping professional. So